Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here on my channel. Today we are going to be talking about liquid drum and bass, some production tips on how to make music in that genre, and we're going to be looking at this project file I have in front of us today for that guide. Now this is something that I just started honestly within the last hour, but I really like the sound of it and I thought this would make a great video. I did do a liquid tutorial a few months ago, and to be honest, I mean sure I'm a little biased here, but I think this track kind of blows that one out of the water. So I wanted to make an updated video talking about some techniques I did and how this came together, which was a relatively quick process. Now I'm sure you want to know what this sounds like before we do get into any of that. I'm not going to play the entire thing just yet because, you know, it's the beginning of the video, that'll probably be at the end. But I'll play this little tiny section of the build-up and a few seconds of the drop, so you get a little idea of what we're working with. Here's that right now. So this is the track that we're going to be talking about in this video, as I did say, and there's a lot more. Like you see there is that section I just paused on that has like a new little introduction of additional synths. We're going to be talking all about that, don't worry, because that's something that was very intentional and helped bring this to the next level, I feel. This is kind of like a chill liquid, but you know, the drums are super hype, so it's a bit more out there in terms of like energy and vibe, which I thought was a really nice touch. But I'm going to break down how I made this basically from scratch, even though, you know, this does exist already. Just that way you get a feel for how to go about this genre. I feel I do have quite a bit to teach. As always, if you enjoy this, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for future content, but let's go ahead and jump straight into things here. So this track started with piano. That was the very first thing I did add. This was not actually drawn in the way you see it here. I did play this on my MIDI keyboard. I do have an 88 key, so I'm able to kind of do more like complex piano pieces. This isn't really even that. I know it looks a little crazy, but it's really just a simple 4-chord progression with some creative voicing and lead lines over the top of that. But the reason I mention that, the reason I do mention that I did this on a keyboard, is because that is something that I feel is super valuable. If you have the means to do that, you absolutely should. Because, you see here, the velocity, it's all over the place, but it's not like I went and clicked randomly to try to mimic a human playing it and get like what's called humanization. This is just kind of how it was. Obviously I did tweak a couple of notes, like say I played something wrong, maybe hit a wrong key, or hit something too hard. I'm able to go and adjust that, but this is, for the most part, just how I did play it. You can see if I zoom in really far, the notes are not perfectly lined up on the grid. And with something like a piano, and especially in liquid drum and bass, you kind of want that. You do not want something that's super robotic right on the grid, because it's just not going to sound real. It's going to sound quite bad, to be honest. And I could demonstrate that, exactly what I mean. So if we solo this and listen to the piano right here on its own, it sounds like this right now. But something I want to demonstrate, say we take an instance of chords that are later on in this track, like over here, and just throw them on like a default piano or something. So you could get a feel for what I mean by this. Say we take like FL keys. I tried to leave some of the humanization in, but for a sound like this, you see I do have everything starting perfectly on the grid. And it makes it sound like this. Let me put that down so it's a little more fair. You see, it still has the velocity that I did play it in because I did copy and paste this from that patch. So it's not perfectly robotic, but I do think this does sound arguably worse, and that's kind of what it would be like more so if you drew it in. That's a super important lesson. I do want to stress that. Humanization is great. I know before my large keyboard was in my room, I had a very tiny one that only really had a couple of octaves, and it was super hard to play anything good on that because of its size. So if you have a large MIDI keyboard, I highly recommend getting that sorted so you could use it in your stuff, because it just allows you to get more realistic pianos, especially if that's like your instrument and you're good with it already. It makes the songwriting process so much easier. But this track is very linear for the most part. What you see is like ordered how I did start it. So after the piano was down, I realized there was a really cool bass line that suggested itself in it. I looked at the bass notes of this chord progression, see these, and I realized this is in a pretty good key. What I mean by that is I look at the bass notes and I try to think of where they would go, like on a subwoofer. Would there be any like weird bottoming out? Do I need to change the key to get it to sound good? And the answer is no. For reference, general rule of thumb, if you're looking at, say, a piano here, just to give you a sound of what we're talking about, anything below like an E or, you know, E flat, D sharp, that kind of region below that is where subwoofers tend to bottom out in a lot of situations. So you want to be mindful of that when you're writing music, especially if it's going to be played in a club. You want to ensure that your bass, for the most part, resides between, say, here and up here. I don't like to go really above that B either, and you see in this track, I am, but what I actually did is when I went and wrote the bass line, I played this note, which is that high D, an octave down. This is so that way, say this was being played out live or something, like I did say, the bass would sit in a really good position. You can see that here I wrote a very simple bass line, just mainly following those root notes with a couple of slides, and that does sound like this. I thought this was a great example of that because, you know, this is a nice liquid bass, and I made it very easily. It's basically just a sine wave, and then I have an upper octave one that has some unison, just to kind of fill out the sides a little bit. And I thought this sat really, really nicely with that piano. Like so. So let's talk about what happened after this. So in Liquid, I feel like the most important elements are like piano, if you're going for that, your bass, and of course your drums. And following what we had here, just before we get to the drums, which is a very important part, I want to talk about this synth that comes in the second half. It sounds like this right now. So you can see this is following the initial chords of that piano as well. And originally this was just going to be like a little saw pluck with like an eighths rhythm. But I decided while I was making the patch, I thought it was a lot cooler if I did like this weird little shape modulating the cutoff as well to give it a little bit of rhythm. And I thought this sat really well in the back. Originally it was right at the beginning, but I thought it sounded better if we introduce our like loop here for a little bit without it, and then that comes in the second half for some variation. So you see all of those together. That was a cool like little almost B section in a way. And at this point is where I added the drums. Now the drums were very easy. You see I haven't really gotten even my own like kick and snare or anything. I was just going through a breaks folder and I found this one that I thought, oh, this is too high energy, this isn't gonna work, but I threw it in anyway, and sure enough, it sounded great. It was like this. So at this part, I was kind of thinking, oh, that sounds really nice, but it needs like some energy because right now, the instrumental is suggesting something a lot more chill drum-wise, whereas those drums are like, oh, this is in your face, we need something to support that. So that's where I added my fourth little melodic layer here. This was just a stab. I just went through a couple of Serum presets that I have, and I wanted something that decayed pretty quickly but had like a big reverb tail to just have it last longer, and just play those four chords, and I got a sound like this. Something that simple gave this track enough energy to the point where those drums worked and fit the vibe. Let me demonstrate that here. And of course we do have a crash underneath that just to give the drop a little bit more impact. Sounds like this now. You see it's added just enough in that high-end energy where that now fits the vibe and works. It was almost perfect, but I thought this needed one more thing to make that a little bit better, and that's where I added a little sine pluck that's following the top line that's suggested in that piano. So if you listen to the piano one more time, pay attention to up here. See that lead line that's suggesting itself there? What I actually did is I wrote a variation of that that's being played on this little pluck. It sounds like this. Played on its own. And it's basically coded in delay, so it's super back in the mix, but I thought that sounded great and supported it well. For that B section, I actually went and did the same thing with a synth patch. So if we play these three together, the piano, the synth patch, and that sine pluck, you have this really cool section now too. That's like layered in a ton of reverb as well, so it's super far back in the mix. But I thought that lead line suggested itself kind of on purpose. We're going to bring that out more in this later section of the track, which sounds like this. I thought that was a really cool touch, and it really brought this to the next level. I think this section right here is the standout section of this track, and it just sounds very full and nice. And you see, this is a very empty project file. There's not a lot going on at all. There's really only this small intro. I wouldn't even really call this a build-up because it's not even fleshed out yet. But already, this is something that if I wanted to, I could go and make something full out of because everything is there that needed to be there. Following the drop, we have this little end section where things get a bit more chill. I basically just removed a few layers, so we have the bass, we have that cool chord synth I made, the stabs, and that's really it. Sounds like this. So this is where it's starting to chill out a bit, but it still has a lot of energy, which is nice. And then over here I experimented with a bit of an outro. The way I did this, I took a saw patch and just did some intense brick wall EQ, so it sounded really weird. Added a couple of stereo oscillators like this. You could really hear the sine layer. And then I just filtered out the sine pluck above it like this. Over time. I thought that sounded really cool. There's not really a transition between here and there yet, but that's something you could go and do. And I thought in general this was a Liquid track that came together super quickly and easily. And I just wanted to go ahead and explain my process in it. I hope this video has helped you out. Let me know in the comments what you think of the track and if you have any additional tips for Liquid drum and bass. I'm quite a fan of this one, definitely want to work on it some more. But as I did mention, if this video helped you out, don't forget to drop a like on it. I'm making a lot of production tutorials, and you should definitely subscribe so you can stay up to date with them. But I'm going to play the track in full for you now. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.